Welcome to Zachrilege Cast episode 14. We are almost in May of 2015. That's kind of crazy. First, I'd like to again thank the brain trust of the Hickory Humanist Alliance for being on last week's lucky episode 13. I got to meet Gene last weekend at ReasonCon 2015, and he was happy and perhaps a little bit tired. I myself was tuckered out, and I got back home on Sunday afternoon. For me, this was a weekend like none other. I met a couple dozen people with whom I've only had internet contact before, and everyone was better in person. I met some of my podcast heroes and met more than a few people with shows that I have to add to my already full iPhone. It was all I could hope for such a relatively short journey, and the best part is I came home to my wife, who's been extraordinarily accepting of me as I occasionally trip over myself into full-blown atheism. So tonight, I'd like to welcome Phil Ferguson, who is literally cash money. You may know him from his tireless efforts in sponsoring atheist and skeptic events like last weekend's ReasonCon, Skepticon, and Reason Rally. He's also part owner of the, well, it says Dogma Debate, but Secular Media Group, which hosts his Phil Ferguson show, a combination of interviews, financial advice, and F-bombs. I ate lunch with him just this Saturday, and now he's here. So good evening, Phil, and good to see you again.
Hello, hello. Yeah, I was thinking about all the podcasts, and there was probably people there from 20 plus podcasts. I don't know how one could find time to listen to all the great content, but I don't know. I kind of felt almost small by being surrounded by so many people who are spending so much time and effort making the world a better place. So it was a great privilege for me to be there.
Well, you're part of the team, you know? You're part of all this, whatever this is.
All doing our part. I remember several years ago, I was at a convention, and the speakers for this segment were talking about how you shouldn't start your own podcast. You shouldn't start your own web channel. You shouldn't start your own blog. You should find a way to help someone who's already going, because too many voices just cause confusion. And it was probably one of the most enraged I've ever been hearing people talk about the movement at a convention, because I want there to be so many voices that when someone Google searches Ken Ham, his website is only one of the top 50 results. And that when an adult or a child or a teenager looks up any topic, homeopathy, psychics, Bigfoot, that they are more likely to find a skeptical person instead of an incredulous person. I think that's how the world changes. So I want as many websites as possible, as many podcasters as possible, as many YouTubers as possible, as many bloggers as possible. If you're thinking about it, do it. You don't have to do it every day. You don't have to do it 5 times a day. Do it once a week. Do it once a month. I don't care. But pick something that means something to you and put something out there. But if you do want to help somebody, that's fine too. But don't shy away from doing your own thing.
Yeah, there are some people who don't. I mean, in a way, especially if you're doing this, which is video, so your face is out there, you might not want to do that. But there are plenty of people doing shows who will welcome help as well. I just think one moment that was kind of funny is I got listed as a podcaster on my badge. And this isn't a podcast, although maybe someday in the future you'll be listening to this on a podcast and go, what are you talking about? So I got listed as a podcast, and Chris Heathen of the Unbuckling the Bible Belt show was just giving me this sour look all weekend because his badge didn't say it. And he actually has a podcast, but you know, that's the way it goes sometimes.
I don't even, I think mine said speaker, so it didn't say podcaster, I don't think.
You should have said, you know, man, the myth, the legend, because you know that's what's happening.
Yeah, I dressed up for you, and here I'll represent for everyone that's watching. There
yeah, no, we all have Illinois stuff. I actually have a Chicago White Sox throwback jersey on, just because I didn't even really think of the connection there.
White Sox. That's wait. That's baseball, right?
That's right. Yeah.
I know sports.
So we'll make a good little connection there with your shirt. So was the introduction you got for your speech at ReasonCon like your favorite introduction of all time?
Well, it was a delightfully canned preparation. I think that was right off my blog, and it was sufficient. It was kind of funny. I can't remember how he said it, but usually people, when they say, I live in Champaign directly, but the two cities are always called Champaign, Urbana. So I can't remember if he said like Champaign, Urbana or something. The Urbana is usually Urbana or Urbana It's kind of funny, but the champagne people usually get, even though it's not spelled like the French beverage. But that was the most unique pronunciation I've ever heard of Champaign Urbana. So that was nice. We had that to look forward to. But always talking in front of a group, it's always an honor. And the thing that's weird with going to a skeptics conference and talking about a topic that's not considered normal skeptic material, the old school skeptics are Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, and psychics. And over time, we finally got into a little bit of medical stuff, homeopathy, well-deserved, psychic surgery, things like that. And the area that I'm pushing that no one else is doing is applying skeptical thinking to investments. And because of reason con being skepticism and religion, I've specifically tied my topic and compared it to religion, where someone selling an investment product wants to make you very happy. They want to tell you what you want to hear, and then you give them your money.
And the return is quite not good.
Yeah, and again, I have literally had people, and it's a known thing inside the industry, that if someone comes to you with a investment that's really, really bad, that you should never tell them that it's really, really bad. You just lead them to believe that you can do something better for them. Whereas I'm more blunt because, do you allow swearing?
Oh, yeah. Well, come on.
I'm a total douche.
I can't figure you out.
And I had to pause because I'm not very good with filtering. And if somebody has something that's horrible, I often will even gasp and be like, "You've been screwed, dude. You need to get out of this as fast as possible." Some people will take that and kind of panic, and they would rather continue in a terrible investment than accept that they've had a terrible investment for the last 5 or 10 or 20 years. Whereas in the skeptical community, the free thought community, the atheists, humanists, all those different labels, they are often more likely, when told that their investment is terrible, want to figure out how to get out of it and how to get out of it quick, because their goal is to make money with their investments. And I'm going to adjust my shade because I'm getting like zebra stripes here. Hang on a second. Talk while I move the...
I see that, yeah. Well, one thing I think would be great to talk about is we mentioned, because we had lunch together, lunch together with like 50 other people, or actually it was probably like 200 other people. I mentioned how it was interesting that you had kind of a niche because you get the financial stuff, but you're involved in the skeptic atheist community. But it's actually brilliant because you're not exactly going to have a lot of competition, and you have an audience that's going to listen to you, not because, bells and whistles, but because you actually have important things to tell them. So how did you get started kind of in
it's funny. Brilliant is the wrong word. Lucky bastard, I think, is the more appropriate thing. It, like many times in my life, I have been very fortunate in being in the right place at the right time. I've been doing investments for about 20 years. And about 8-9 years ago, I had an assignment for a job that I had during the day when I did my investments at nights and weekends, where I had to spend 2 years in Arkansas. It's the state right below Missouri, for those who don't know. And I saw what it would be like to live in a place that was controlled by religion. Because in Champaign, Urbana, Illinois, or Chicago, Illinois, it's really not that a problem. And matter of fact, often when people show up to our free thinker group, they kind of wonder why we bother, because what's the harm? Where's the problem with religion? And I thought the same way until I spent 2 years in Arkansas, and it kind of scared me straight. And I said, look, I have to do more. So being, very, how should I say, blessed in my life, is that allowed to use? I thought I'd give some money to help some conferences out so that they can meet their budgets, so that maybe they can keep the costs down. And the one that came up really imminently was Skepticon. And I talked to JT Eberhardt for Skepticon 3. And they had a room that limited them to about 500 people, but they were still several months out from the conference and they were booked. They wanted to go to a bigger room. And I said, "How much money do you need?" And he said, $5,000. And I thought, well, That's real money. He says, well, there's a good chance you'll get most of it back because they'll take donations from people, but they needed the money up front. So I underwrote that convention, and I did get most of my money back. And I've continued to sponsor conventions, some very small amounts, some not so small amounts. And it kind of depends on the size of the convention and how close and dear to my heart it is. A free convention like Skepticon always has a warm spot for me. And it's kind of contrary to maybe financial wisdom because free conventions tend to draw people that can afford them. Whereas a convention that has like the Amazing Meeting, which has a $500 price tag, it tends to draw a slightly different crowd because people that can't afford $500 tickets aren't going. So that being said, I really enjoy spending money on a convention that is free and brings in several hundred extra people that can't afford a convention, and often it might be the only convention they get to. And I know at ReasonCon, I was surprised by the amazing number of people that were their first conference ever, because ReasonCon, I think, was $50 or $75, very, very affordable. And the number of people that would say things like, I've never been to one of these before, and I felt at home. I had all these friends. I had a great time. I could talk freely. It's very, I don't know, very empowering. And a lot of those people want to now go out and be loud and be heard and make a change. And to me, that is meaningful.
Yep, me too. That was my first one. I've been to, they had a local one. It was called Skepticamp, and it was more skeptic, and it didn't quite. It was a relatively small group. This one definitely had obviously a different feel because there was a bunch of people from all over the country, and heck, we had. I heard there's someone from Australia. I didn't meet who that was, but I know Deb came from Canada. So hey, we had at least 2 countries represented.
I did talk to someone, I don't know how directly, but they were from Brazil. So I did talk to someone that speaks Portuguese and they're from Brazil. So I don't think they came from Brazil for the concert or the convention, but they were there. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah, it was pretty solid. So when did you what was your first conference? And then what was it? Was it a Skepticon? It was like your first one that you decided to sponsor. And then when did you get to be speaking guy?
First one that I probably went to was like TAM 3 or TAM 4, the Amazing Meeting, which is pretty close to 10 years ago. Just simply a guest, never been to anything before, and I was just stunned. And I remember coming back from that, and my wife said after I returned that I had that same, I don't know, glow about me that she got from going to her Christian conferences. At the time, she was a fundamentalist Christian, and she was shocked that I could go to something that was specifically secular and come back and be so, I don't know, so fulfilled, so happy, so content, just delighted that there were hundreds of people somewhere that, for the most part, we all have our limitations, but for the most part, we're quite reasonable. And she was so interested by this that she asked if she could go with me the next year. And I say this because it's the truth that I had a moment of weakness and I said no. I saw it as my thing, and she had her religion thing, and this was my non-religion thing. And she was quite saddened, reasonably so. And I thought about it for a day or two, and I came back to her and I said that I probably could have handled that better, and that not only was she welcome to come with me the next year, that I would like to very specifically invite her, and I would appreciate her company and coming with me. And she went, and she was shocked by the attitudes and the way some of the people talked specifically about religion. It was a big experience for her. But I do remember when we were leaving that conference, we were in the Las Vegas airport, and she said, so our memories aren't exactly what we think happened. They're often revised and modified, and they're filled with errors. And I said something like, yes, honey, we've talked about that dozens of times. And she says, yes, but now someone else said it. It's very common in relationships. Sometimes as humans, we can kind of tune out the person that we're always around. And now a actual scientist. I think Steven Pinker gave a talk that year, and so she wanted to read his book about how the brain works. So she read his book, and Phil Plait, the bad astronomer, was there, so she read his book, and then she started reading The Friendly Atheist. Then she started reading Phil Plait's blog, and then she started reading Ferengula by P.Z. Myers, and all of a sudden things started to change. And then through this long chain of events over a couple of years, she finally got to the point where she's not religious anymore. And it, in part, has to do with her going to one conference. It can make a difference.
Yeah, it's intriguing that because I got to meet, Bill and Susie at Barroom Atheist, and I got to meet with Bobby and Ashley of the No Religion Required podcast, and in both cases, it was the husband who kind of started on the journey, and the wife was like, "I don't know what you're doing here," and then over time, kind of soaked it in.
I don't know.
think it was the other, like you said, the other person,
right?
Getting other input, need more input, like number 5, that kind of gets you there.
It is something that's weird, and I don't know. I don't know. I don't have any reason to believe it's biological, but there does seem to be. Oh gosh, I tread lightly here. More frequent in a heterosexual couple that it's the man that comes out of religion first. I don't know why that is. That's a fascinating thing, and maybe someone's already researched it, and there's already answers out there. But it's not always the case, but that does seem to be the predominant thing. And for many years, a lot of these conferences were very male. When I started doing this stuff 10 years ago, I was often the youngest person in a conference by years, maybe even sometimes a decade, depending on the conference. And that has shifted. It has become much closer to 50-50 men and women. And a lot of the conferences have become less uniformly white. Still maybe not a accurate representation for the United States of America as a whole, but it's improving. And I see all that as steps in the right direction.
Yeah, I think it's all about steps, because I go to a couple local groups and it does tend to skew, like I say, it's occasionally pale and male, but we're getting the diversity in gender and race, which is good because we need to hear from everybody, because I think everybody's story is interesting, especially here, because you're going against the societal grain big time.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned in the pre-show, I figured I'd let you get another chance to talk about this. Was it socially responsible mutual funds?
It wasn't actually in my talk at North Carolina, but it came up, I don't know, 6 or 7 times over the next day that people would come up to me and they would ask my opinion. They said, "What do you think about socially responsible mutual fund or socially conscious mutual fund as a way to invest?" And like I normally do, I would give this flat out straight answer to start with, that they shouldn't do it. And they drop their jaws and they're in shock, because it is something that's very popular in secular circles and humanist circles, that socially conscious mutual funds are the way to go. I even gave a talk at the Chicago Ethical Humanist Society once. And when I was done, someone asked if I would put money into a socially conscious mutual fund. And I said, no. Next question. And I thought it was going to start a riot, because apparently half the people there have money in these funds, and I just cast them aside like nothing. And so they were not going to let it go that easily. And as a skeptic, one of the things that I like to do is from time to time re-examine my views to double check that what I thought was true and what I've been saying I think is true. Sometimes for years, I need to dig back into it. So a few months ago, I went and reinvestigated this topic and found some surprising information. And for the listener who wants to read, because there's some math involved in it, sometimes it's better to read than to hear it. It is at my website, polarisfinancialplanning.com, and it's called Socially Responsible Mutual Funds. You can find it there. But I learned a couple things. One is that there are now dozens upon dozens of socially conscious mutual funds, but they don't all do the same thing. Some avoid gambling, some avoid tobacco, some avoid weapons, some promote human rights and ethics and civil equality. They all have different goals and agendas. So if you want to find one that matches you, which is the whole point of doing this, you have some research to do. So that can be very difficult to do and very time consuming to do. The other thing that I found that was really a problem is that virtually all of these socially conscious mutual funds reserve the right to not follow what they laid out as their agenda. So if they see an opportunity to make money, they can break the rules of the socially conscious mutual fund and buy whatever they want. So you can do research and find the one that you think fits you personally, but then they still reserve the right in the 70-page prospectus to do what the fuck ever they want. So I did find that interesting. The other thing that I found amazing, and I went to a website called socialfunds.com, because to be a good skeptic, you don't just find things that agree with your worldview. You try to find the opposing opinions. And this was a website, it was the biggest website I could find that promotes socially conscious mutual funds, and it has data on socially conscious mutual funds. So I went through there and I found all of the general US stock funds that have returns for the last 10 years. And I think, I'm trying to look at the site here, I think it's about 12 of them I found. All but one of them underperformed the market as a whole. So you could have made more money in the market. And the one that did beat the market, will they beat it in the future? I have no way to know, but the odds suggest that they won't. And the average underperformance was about 1.6 to 2% of the market. So you're dramatically underperforming. So you have the problem that you got to find the one that agrees with your philosophies. Then you have no assurance from them that they'll actually follow what you just convinced yourself is a good philosophy. And then you dramatically underperform the market. But the fourth problem is the one that blows people away, is that if you found a fund that matches your lifestyle, your philosophies, if they actually followed that, if they match the market returns, which they don't, the fourth thing is the most devastating of all. You're not making a fucking difference in any way whatsoever. And that's what blows people's minds, because when you put money in a mutual fund, the mutual fund has to buy shares for the mutual fund. They buy the shares from other shareholders. They don't buy them from the company generally, unless there's an initial public offering. So when they buy shares, they buy it from someone else that already owns it. The company doesn't know you exist. They don't care that you exist. You're not influencing the price of the stock. You're not motivating the good companies. You're not punishing the bad companies. You are having no effect whatsoever on the companies you think that you're doing good by. So all you're doing is underperforming the market and having actually no input. And of course, the smart skeptics will always say, if enough of us, if 10 or 20% of all Americans or all investors around the world didn't buy, let's say, Philip Morris because they hate tobacco, wouldn't that drive the price of the stock down? And I said, it will create downward pressure, but as soon as the stock becomes valued less than what the inherent holdings and the assets and the profitability of the company is, there is going to be somebody out there who will see that and buy the stock and run the price right back up to where it's supposed to be. And what you'll end up doing is rewarding them with a greater financial return. So the people that don't follow your agenda will actually make more money as you continue to make less and less money. So I had someone ask me then, what do I do instead? And I said, well, you get a really good investment plan and you do investing the same way that I do, which is to make the most money possible with the least risk possible. And then if you really want to, you can skim 2% off of your returns every year and donate it to the causes you really like, whether it's Foundation Beyond Belief, whether it's the Red Cross, your local pet clinic, whatever you want to donate to, you can then have absolute control over that. And the first person I told that to, they said, there's no way in hell I'm scooping 2% of my profit off every year. I go, we are already doing that in the socially conscious mutual fund. You're just not aware of it. So you're losing the 2% already, and you're doing nothing. You're affecting no outcome. You're not changing anything. This is purely a marketing ploy. You're not doing anything to make the world a better place. That's
so dang, Phil, you stepped on my joke. I was all about to say, well, Phil says stop trying to make a difference. But see, you can make a difference. You just have to do it in a different way, and that's okay.
Yeah, and the nice thing is that when you donate money, you might be able to get recognition, which may or may not be important to you, but you definitely can control who you give it to. So if that organization changes or no longer meets your values and goals, you just stop giving them money and you give it to somebody else. So it's far, far better to make more money and just have a really good and balanced portfolio and then donate to where you want to donate to.
And I have a cat with a cold in the background, so he's going to be sneezing in the background because he decides he wants to be part of this, whether I like it or not.
Well, I'm suffering a little bit of allergies. I just went to testing the other day and found out that one of the 4 things I'm most allergic to is apparently birch tree pollen. And the tree that lives right outside of my bedroom window happens to be a birch tree. So actually took that down today. So that's one less problem in my life, hopefully going forward.
So you identify the problem and you solve the problem.
Well, we solved that problem. I can't get rid of other allergens for me, apparently, are ragweed, which are very common. Most people are allergic to ragweed level. And grasses, including stuff that is in the lawn. So,
well, one of the things I'm most allergic to is sitting right behind my computer right now. So what are you going to do?
Well, they suggested that I get a HEPA filter. And I said, well, I already have a 3-room HEPA filter in my office and a 3-room HEPA filter in my bedroom. So even with that, I've had some itching and irritation. And this season, for whatever reason, it's been dry eyes. But that's not what your listeners are here for. So
personal allergy stories. Let's keep them coming, you know? Yeah, there are certain things that you hear that kind of shock you when you first hear it, and then over time you learn to accept it. Kind of like, you know, David Fitzgerald was one of the speakers, and
yeah,
he wrote a book all about how he thinks that Jesus actually didn't exist as a historical figure. And when you first hear that, it kind of blows your mind because you're like, but everybody talks about Jesus and there's all this stuff. And then you find out when you look into it and you investigate, you go, huh, it's kind of a thin case you have there. And it's maybe a slightly higher shock factor, but at the same time, we all have, well, a lot of people have jobs. I currently don't, but when you do, you have a 401k. And you don't really realize what kind of fees are involved with that, like what's getting taken off the top. So what do you have recommendations with like a 401k in terms of what to do with it, in terms of like matching and, you know, picking the right funds that work for you?
but it's funny. And for the listeners, we did not talk about this pre-show, but that would be the next topic I wanted to do. So kudos to you for your psychic abilities.
Yeah,
because
I'll be here all week.
For most Americans and possibly people in other countries, I don't know how it works in other countries, but America is where I'm licensed. Most people have the bulk of their retirement money through their work, which I don't think we should have, but we do. And it's usually through a 401k or a 403b. And one of the problems with the industry is that the expense rates of the average funds keep going up and up and up because most people don't know what the expense ratio is. They don't know what's covered. They don't know what's not covered. And when you're tied into the 401k plan that your company offers, if your mutual fund goes from 1.42% to 1.61%, you have no real say in it. You can't even take your money out of the 401k plan. And quite honestly, you probably didn't even notice that the expense ratio went up. And so as long as that is all in place, the companies apparently cannot resist the temptation to keep raising expense ratios because they make more and more and more profit. So the average mutual fund now is a total, not just the expense ratio, but there's other costs that aren't included in the expense ratio. Your total costs are something over 2%, 2.1, 2.2, 2.3. It can be worse, but it can be a lot less depending on the options that you have. So my standard rule for most people, and everyone's situation is different, but without knowing more details about your situation, my standard rule is if you have a 401k at work, you want to put in all the money necessary to get 100% of the free money. So if you put in 6% and your employer matches 50% up to the first 6%, thereby giving you 3%, it's hard to have a plan that's so bad that it's not worth getting the free money of 3%. I've seen it done. but it's unusual. So my default position is to put in everything you need to get all of the free money. If you are able to save beyond that, and hopefully you can, you want to go to an IRA or a Roth IRA if it's possible. And what a lot of people don't know is that if you are married, you can contribute to your IRA or Roth IRA, and your spouse's IRA or Roth IRA, even if they do not have any income. And this is one of those things that is granted to people who are married, which is one of the reasons why prohibiting people who are same-sex getting marriages is so insidious, because there's no way around this if you're not married. You cannot enjoy this benefit. So a little plug there for equal rights of marriage there. But once you've maxed out the so if you have a great job and let's say you make $100,000 and you put 6% in your company plan and they give you 3%, you're making almost 9%, maybe even a little bit more depending on how you want to look at it, in your savings. If you then put in $5,500 in your account and your spouse's account, save another $11,000, you're close to saving $20,000, and you're only out of pocket about $12,000, maybe $13,000, because of the tax benefits that may be involved, depending on the type of IRA that you use, and you're well on your way to retirement. If you're still able to save more than that, and that's unusual, but it happens, then you probably want to go back to your 401k. But if you're less than 10 years from retirement, you may actually be mathematically better off to invest in a taxable account, because you get to enjoy long-term capital gains tax rates, which are 15%, and not put the money into an IRA or a tax-free account and then just pull it back out and pay 31% tax rate. How's that?
Sounds good.
Lots of math.
That's nice. See? And this will be coming to you on a future Phil Ferguson show. So there you go.
Well, yeah, and excellent segue. The show, of course, is the Phil Ferguson Show. It's part of the Secular Media Network. It's part of the Secular Media Group. You can find it on Spreaker or iTunes if you simply search Phil Ferguson. The idea was actually David Smalley's, and when he first suggested that title for my podcast, I told him no, and he said, "Why not?" And I said, "I like it too much." So I'm always skeptical even about what I think, and I was worried that it was simply to appeal to my ego, which I guess I probably have one. But he then pointed out that since I've been doing things for up to 10 years, there's a lot of people that know me by name. So why come up with a whole new name for a podcast that I have to then promote? Anyone that knows Phil Ferguson already now knows the name of my podcast. It's the Phil Ferguson Show.
Plus, it's kind of unusual in a way that there's a one-person show, or like one person running a show. A lot of shows that I've
It is
part of our usually duos or more, with rotating co-hosts and all that stuff. But
I wonder if I need some sidekick, somebody whimsical and
my cat's a sidekick. That's what I got.
There you go.
Since we're about we're more than 30 minutes in, but do a quick. I usually do live reads. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to come up with anything witty, so I'm just going to say two podcasts that I had not listened to before, but I've gotten into my iPod this week that have done ReasonCon recaps. In the Name of God, and Matthew the Apostle gave me a nice card, and I think I had a beer or two with him, so that was nice. And Atheism 101. They'll also have a nice recap because strangely, with all these podcasters going to this conference, no one was popping out shows right immediately after that. It's funny how that works out.
Well, it's funny. Normally, I have a show come out on Tuesday, which I think that's today. Is it Tuesday?
Yep.
I have no show this week, so I'm waiting to hear the bitching and moaning that will probably come with that. But sometimes you just got to do what you got to do, and you skip a show. So
all coming my way. So this is a good time, since we're talking about shows. How did you get started in podcasting, and then of course, how did you decide to invest in the dogma debate empire that is now Secular Media Group?
Podcasting. A friend of mine, Rachel Johnson. She still has a podcast, but she's currently inactive, doing other things. She's in college. Called The Pink Atheist, and they had me on as a guest once, and they said, "Wow, you are a great guest. Why don't you come back?" And I came back a couple more times, and they just said, "Well, why don't you just be a co-host with us?" And so I was one of the three co-hosts on a show called The Pink Atheist for almost exactly a year, and it went very well. I enjoyed it, had a great time, but I really wanted to do a little bit more shameless self-promotion, and I didn't feel like someone else's podcast was necessarily the place for that. So I bowed out of that graciously and thanked them for the opportunity. And I started a show called Skeptic Money on Air, which I did for about 6 months last year. And then, of course, life happens and you get busy. And then this January, just 4 months ago, started the Phil Ferguson Show as part of the Secular Media Network. And how I got involved with that, David Smalley and Dogma Debate and Atheist Books was at a position where there were some new books that were coming out that they could get the rights to make audiobooks for, but cash was tight. Business was growing fine, but sometimes things come up that you have to get right away or you lose the opportunity to do so. So David had reached out to a few different people that might be willing to invest, and I was one of those people. And what we were talking about pre-show is that I have no real input into the organization. I kind of consider myself a silent investor. I invested in it because I believe not only in the mission, but the management and the capacity of David Smalley to make that a success. And I support the philosophy of at least some of our programs making money. Skeptics Guide to the Universe has commercials. They now make some money. Seth Andrews with The Thinking Atheist has a regular advertiser, which I won't mention because they didn't pay you. Maybe you can contact them later. But
yeah, I could probably repeat it since I hear it so often, but yeah, I won't.
It's one of those things that I've been promoting for years, and American Atheists has been fantastic with this at their conventions. And Skepticon in Springfield, Missouri is amazing at bringing in sponsors and tablers, and they appreciate the value of that. But I kind of wanted to show the world that you can make money marketing specifically to this community, specifically to atheists, skeptics, humanists, secularists. And the first year or two, I did a few conventions. It was no big deal. I think it may have been 2 years before someone came up to me and said, "So you're an atheist and you're promoting atheist conventions?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I am." And they said, "Can I hire you?" I thought, "Well, sure." I mean, I always kind of thought maybe that could happen, but it wasn't the reason that I did it. And when I do talks at conventions, I know that there's a possibility that one or two or more people might hire me, but that's not the reason that I do it. It is to spread education about how to invest, how not to get ripped off. Of course, it's, a very nice side benefit for me that someone hears me and says, "I agree with what you said. I know I could do it by myself like you just told me, but I don't want to." It's just like I don't fix my car. I could have replaced the strut on my Prius a few weeks ago, but it's not going to happen. I'm not going to do it. So I pay someone who knows what they're doing. They get it done quicker and faster, and I can get on with my life and do things that I more enjoy. And there are people who really, really enjoy doing their own investments. And if I can help them and it makes their life better, that's fantastic. So, yeah, that's kind of how that all came about. But like this year, my plan is to be at 15 conferences, several of which I will speak. Many of them I will be a sponsor. Some I will just have a table, and a few I will just show up and hang out with everybody just like everyone else.
Sounds good. So what's the first one you spoke at? First conference?
Oh, I don't, I'm hard pressed. I think it's probably a couple of local events around Champaign, Bloomington. That's probably the first thing, really small, but it's one of those things that people do ask me from time to time. How do you get to be a speaker at conventions? I don't know. I mean, it's weird because each convention is different, and sometimes, like Reason Con, I got asked to speak at that many, many months ago, and I don't know exactly why that had me on the short list of people they wanted right away, but I'm very honored. But then I also have things like Little Rock, Arkansas. I've spoken to that group or to their conference, Reason in the Rock, now 5 times over the last 6 or 7 years. So uh, they just asked me if I could come to their conference next year, and I said, "Do you want me to come again?" And they said the conference is not the same if I'm not one of the main speakers. So that's great, but it also I don't know, in a way it's a kind of a heavy burden that they have expectations now that you're going to be amusing, entertaining. Um, I don't always do talks about money. Matter of fact, my most well-known talk, and it's on YouTube if anyone wants to look at it, it's called Breaking the Cycle: How to Get Kids Out of Religion. And I had done that talk a few times, and then I actually did it at Skepticon 5, and that's the one that's on YouTube. I think it's got 20,000 views, which I know on YouTube is nothing, but to me that's a big deal. And probably still every month, even though that was 2 years ago, every month someone emails me and says, "I saw that video, and then I sat down with my kids and we watched that video." Uh, and the very first time I gave that talk, people were kind of, going, "He's going to talk about how to get kids out of religion," because the talk is not just how to get your kids out of religion, but how to get your kids' friends out of religion, how to get your friends, hood kids that you might be able to see or have time with because you have kids. You don't necessarily want to be the 45-year-old guy knocking on the door with a 13-year-old girl and saying, "Let me talk to you." That might appear too Catholic. Well, actually, the boy. Sorry, I got to keep that straight. But
Too soon? No.
yeah, too soon. Too many. That's probably what it is. Too many. The strategies are sometimes very simple. Like one of the things I did for all of my nieces and nephews when they turned 13 is I bought them season 1 of Stargate SG-1. A big fan of that show. I know it's getting a little dated now, but it was 10 years of killing false gods. And maybe they watch it, maybe they don't. Maybe they get into sci-fi because of it, maybe they don't. Often with kids between 8 and 12, I'll buy them either for a birthday a magic present, a magic gift, so that they can learn how magic works, or a book on optical illusions so that they get to experience and learn that the world is not always what it seems to be. Anything to, from simple things like that to something more rigorous, where if you've got nieces and nephews, occasionally send them a funny YouTube video that happens to very earnestly discuss religion. There's all kinds of ways you can do it, but you always have to keep in mind what your boundaries are and what your limits are. Push where you can. I once had a couple of nephews over, and I put in Cosmos. This was before the new Cosmos. It was the old, 30-year-old Cosmos. And just a few seconds in, one of them just kept asking question after question after question. And we finally got to the point where he asked if I believed in God. And I said, no, because I give honest answers to virtually everything, regardless, sometimes to the consequences. And he broke down in tears. So we took off Cosmos. We put on SpongeBob, and everything got better.
Saved.
But, it was a moment that he probably will never forget because of his age. And maybe it makes a difference, maybe it doesn't. But what really broke my heart was the next day when we were taking them home, they said, "Uncle Phil, you know what? It's really difficult to be at your house." And I thought, we had a great time. We played games. We played some pool. We did some foosball. We went and saw the sites at the University of Illinois. What was so difficult at being at my house? I thought we had a great time. And they said, well, the big problem is that you let us ask questions. That was what was difficult for them out of the whole weekend, that they were allowed. But
it doesn't matter what I
not for me.
say or think.
Yeah, that's one of those things that's sometimes hard to convey. The assumption that if you are an atheist, you're going to raise your kids as atheists, kind of like how a Catholic would raise their kids Catholic, in that there is nothing else and you have no choice and you choose at age 8. But giving kids the opportunity to kind of make their own decisions and learn how to think.
Right.
They may go to religion, but at least they'll be their decision.
It could happen. I know one of my daughter's proudest moments was around the age of 11 or 12, she played Mary in the Passion play at the church she was attending as an atheist. So for some reason, she desperately wanted to play Mary as an atheist. She thought that was ironic or something. But I know we're running out of time because I've got to call a client here in a few minutes. But just for a recap, I know you're about to ask because you're a great host, so I'll save you the time. On Twitter, it's at Skeptic Money. On Facebook, it's Phil Ferguson, but I'm right at that limit of 5,000, so that's kind of tough. But you can contact me there. Polaris Financial Planning is my website. My old blog, which occasionally I put stuff on, is Skeptic Money. And you can contact me through any one of those means. And if you have an old 401k that's hanging out there from a previous job, move it before something bad happens to it. I've had many people come to me and their old employers are now bankrupt, and it can be a huge, huge pain to move that 401k. So you don't have to hire me, just move it.
Okay, I'll be talking to him shortly, so we'll see how that goes. I feel like the first interview went well. So before we close for the evening, is there anything you would like to ask me?
No, nothing comes to mind at this time. I think what we need to do is schedule a time for you to be on my show, because that'd be great for listeners to hear some more video casters. Is that what? You're not a podcaster. You just said that, so.
Yeah, it's a tough label, and it's weird because I did go to a conference with my tag saying Zachrilege, and obviously that's not my Christian name, but it's, people remember. I saw Tracy Harris as I was leaving. She's like, "Hey, you're that Zachrilege guy." So at least that and the monkey hat I was wearing. But we'll finish with a brief closing statement. So America is having a bit of a social media crisis at the moment. This morning when I was doing my daily elliptical, I saw on the news that social media was to blame for the riots in Baltimore. We're just going to have to bounce back and forth between loving and hating social media for a while. One thing America doesn't do very well is face its past in regards to race, class, and gender. The result can be bloody. I wish everyone safety and that we can work in a society that makes everyone treated with dignity, respect, and love. So we will say thanks again to Phil Ferguson for being here on relatively short notice. And as a special bonus episode, we, as in me and all of my personalities, or my cat,
yes,
will have Miss Ashley of No Religion Required on tomorrow to complete my No Religion Required set. Although I guess I still need to get the Prophet Jeremiah on one of these days. So we will just say good night and stay skeptical.